The tattoo needle hummed against skin like a prayer whispered in the dark, etching a promise that would span decades and bind two souls in ways neither could imagine. It was 1999, and Marcus Delgado was 22 years old, his hands steady as he guided the ink across Maria's shoulder, a perfect reproduction of the photograph she clutched in her free hand. In the picture, Maria sat radiant and glowing, 6 months pregnant, her hand resting on the curve of her belly where their daughter grew. It had been her idea, this tattoo, born from a dream she'd had the night before. "I want our baby girl to know she was wanted," Maria had whispered, her dark eyes bright with tears and hope. "Someday, when she's old enough, we'll get matching tattoos. Mother and daughter, forever connected." Marcus had smiled then, young and reckless and still believing that love could conquer the streets that had raised him. He was already deep in the life, running numbers for the Serpientes, earning respect through violence and fear, but Maria made him want to be different. Better. She made him believe he could walk away from it all. He was wrong about a lot of things back then. But the tattoo, that had been perfect. A masterpiece of devotion inked in black and gray, capturing not just the image but the love, the hope, the promise of a future where their family would be whole. 3 months later, when baby Sophia was born with Maria's eyes and Marcus's stubborn chin, he held his daughter and swore he would protect her from the world that had shaped him. He would give her everything, safety, stability, a father who came home every night. But promises made by 22-year-old boys are fragile things, and the streets have a way of collecting debts that can't be paid with good intentions. When Sophia was 2 years old and taking her first wobbling steps across their small apartment, Marcus was arrested in a drug raid that went sideways. 3 cops, 2 gang members, and 1 civilian caught in the crossfire. The civilian was a grandmother walking home from church. She didn't make it to her granddaughter's birthday party. Marcus did 18 months in county jail, and every day behind bars was a reminder of what he'd become and what he was losing. Maria brought Sophia to visit twice, 2-year-old hands pressed against bulletproof glass, confused brown eyes wondering why Daddy couldn't come home. After the second visit, Maria stopped answering his calls. When he got out, they were gone. No forwarding address, no goodbye note, just an empty apartment and the ghost of lullabies that would haunt him for decades. Marcus told himself it was for the best. Maria was smart, beautiful, deserving of a man who could love her without destroying everything he touched. Sophia was innocent, untainted, better off without a father who brought violence wherever he went. So he let them go. And he let the streets swallow what remained of his soul. 23 years later, Marcus Delgado was 45 years old and the undisputed leader of the Serpientes, the most feared gang in the city. His empire stretched across 6 neighborhoods, his word was law to over 200 soldiers, and his reputation for ruthless intelligence had earned him respect from rivals and allies alike. He was also utterly, completely alone. The young woman standing in his office was maybe 25, with dark hair pulled back in a severe ponytail and eyes that missed nothing. She'd been running with his crew for 6 months, working her way up from street-level lookout to trusted lieutenant with a combination of fearless determination and street-smart cunning that reminded him of himself at her age. Her name was Sophia Reyes, and she was everything he looked for in a soldier, loyal, intelligent, completely unafraid of the violence that came with the life. She'd earned her stripes running drugs through territories where cops and rival gangs shot first and asked questions never. She'd proven herself in fights that left grown men unconscious and whimpering. She was, in Marcus's considered opinion, exactly the kind of person who would either rise to his inner circle or end up dead in an alley before her 26th birthday. What he couldn't shake was the nagging sense that he knew her from somewhere. "Reyes," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." She sat, spine straight, hands folded, waiting. Good. Patience was a virtue in this business, and most young soldiers had none. "You've been making waves," Marcus continued, studying her face. "Taking initiative. Showing leadership." "Just doing my job," she replied, voice steady. "Your job is to follow orders. What you've been doing is thinking ahead, anticipating problems, solving them before I have to." He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers steepled. That kind of initiative can be valuable. Or it can be dangerous. Which do you think it is? Marcus almost smiled. Almost. Depends on where your loyalty lies. With the Serpientes. With you. And why is that? Most people in this life are here because they have no choice. Desperation, addiction, circumstance. You're different. You choose to be here. For the first time since she'd entered his office, something flickered behind Sophia's controlled expression. Pain, maybe. Or anger. Maybe I don't have anywhere else to go. Everyone has somewhere else to go. The question is whether they're running towards something or away from it. She was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus found himself studying the sharp line of her jaw, the way she held her shoulders, the defiant tilt of her chin when she was thinking. Familiar. All of it maddeningly familiar. My mother died when I was 17, she said finally. Cancer. We didn't have insurance, couldn't afford treatment until it was too late. Spent her last months in charity wards, dying a little more every day while bureaucrats decided if she was worth saving. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me something valuable. The world doesn't care about people like us. We survive by being stronger, smarter, more ruthless than everyone else trying to step on us. Your organization offers a chance to do that. And that's enough? Money and power? It's better than helplessness. She stood to leave, and that's when Marcus saw it. As she reached for the door handle, her sleeve rode up just enough to reveal the edge of something on her forearm. Ink. A tattoo. Reyes, he called. She turned back. That tattoo on your arm. What is it? Her hand moved instinctively to cover the spot, protective. Personal. I'm not asking for your life story. Just curious about the artwork. She hesitated, then slowly pushed up her sleeve. The tattoo was exquisite, a perfect reproduction of a photograph rendered in black and gray ink. A young woman, radiant and glowing, one hand resting on a pregnant belly. The woman's face was turned slightly toward the camera, smiling with a joy so pure it seemed to glow from the skin itself. Marcus's world stopped. He knew that photograph. He had taken that photograph 26 years ago, in the small apartment he'd shared with the only woman he'd ever loved. He had held the camera with shaking hands, trying to capture Maria's beauty, her happiness, their future. And 3 months later, he had used that same photograph as reference when he tattooed it onto Maria's shoulder, a promise of connection between mother and daughter that would last forever. Where did you get this? His voice came out rougher than intended. My mother. Sophia's voice was softer now, vulnerable in a way he hadn't heard before. She told me that someday we would get matching tattoos. Mother and daughter, forever connected. She died before we could do it together, so I got it for both of us. Marcus forced his expression to remain neutral even as his heart hammered against his ribs. Your mother had the same tattoo? Exactly the same. It was her most precious possession. She used to tell me it represented hope, family, the promise that no matter what happened, we would always belong to each other. Sophia's hand traced the edge of the tattoo through her sleeve. After she died, it was the only way I could think of to keep her with me. What was your mother's name? Maria Reyes. Not Martinez. Not Delgado. She'd changed her name, started over, built a new life. Of course she had. It's what he would have done. She sounds like she was a good mother. She was everything. Worked 3 jobs to keep us fed, never missed a school play or parent-teacher conference. She used to say that being a mother was the most important job in the world, that everything else was just details. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. Behind his desk, his hands were shaking. This was his daughter. His Sophia. The baby girl he'd held for 18 precious months before his choices destroyed everything. She was sitting 3 feet away from him, telling him about the woman he'd loved and lost, wearing the tattoo he'd designed as a symbol of the family he'd abandoned. And she had no idea who he was. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to transfer her out of his crew immediately. Send her across town to work for one of his lieutenants, make sure their paths never crossed again. She was dangerous now in ways she couldn't understand, a vulnerability he couldn't afford. But even as the thought crossed his mind, Marcus knew he couldn't do it. For 23 years, he'd wondered if she was safe, healthy, happy. He'd imagined her in college, maybe, or married with children of her own, living the clean life he'd never been able to give her. Instead, she was here. In his world. In danger every day from the same streets that had cost him everything. He couldn't send her away. But he couldn't tell her the truth, either. Not now, when revealing his identity would destroy the trust she'd worked so hard to earn, the place she'd carved out for herself in his organization. So he would do what he'd spent 23 years learning to do. He would protect her from the shadows, keeping her safe while maintaining the fiction that she was just another soldier in his army. Even if it killed him. Over the following weeks, Marcus found himself watching Sophia with the careful attention of a father and the strategic mind of a gang leader. She was good at this life, too good. She had the intelligence to read situations before they turned dangerous, the ruthlessness to handle problems permanently, and the loyalty to follow orders even when they put her at risk. She was, in other words, exactly the kind of person who would either rise to command a crew of her own or die young in a war between territories. The war was already coming. The Diablos had been pushing into Serpiente's territory for months, testing boundaries, probing for weaknesses. They were led by Carlos Vega, a vicious psychopath who solved problems with extreme violence and had no respect for the old agreements that kept the city's gangs from destroying each other completely. Vega wanted Marcus dead and the Serpientes scattered, and he didn't much care how many bodies he had to stack to make it happen. Marcus had been preparing for this war for months, but now every decision was complicated by the presence of the daughter he couldn't acknowledge. Every assignment he gave her, every risk she took, every operation that might put her in danger felt like a betrayal of the promise he'd made to her mother 26 years ago. He started finding excuses to keep her closer to headquarters, assigning her to intelligence gathering and planning rather than street operations. When she questioned the change, he told her it was because he valued her strategic thinking over her gun skills. It wasn't entirely a lie. She was smart, insightful, able to see patterns and connections that others missed. But the real reason was that he couldn't bear the thought of her getting shot in some nameless alley, dying without ever knowing that her father had been there, had been trying to keep her safe. The other lieutenants noticed, of course. In an organization built on paranoia and careful hierarchies, any deviation from normal patterns attracted attention. "Boss," said Diego, Marcus's second-in-command, during one of their weekly strategy meetings. "You sure about keeping Reyes on intelligence? Girl's got steel in her spine and ice in her veins. Seems like a waste to have her behind a desk when the Diablos are gearing up to move against us." "I'm sure," Marcus replied, not looking up from the street maps spread across his desk. "It's just, some of the soldiers are starting to talk. Wondering if maybe she's got some kind of special relationship with you." Marcus's head came up slowly, his eyes cold enough to freeze blood. "What kind of special relationship?" Diego held up his hands. "Not that kind, boss. Nothing like that. Just wondering why she gets preferential treatment. Good assignments, protection from the dangerous stuff. You know how people talk. People need to mind their own business. They need to understand the hierarchy. Right now, some of them are wondering if the hierarchy still means what it used to mean." Marcus stared at his oldest friend and most trusted lieutenant, weighing his options. Diego had been with him for 15 years, had taken bullets for the organization, had never once questioned an order or challenged a decision. If Diego was worried about morale, about the perception of favoritism, then it was a real problem. But Diego didn't understand that Sophia wasn't just another soldier. She was the most important person in Marcus's world, the only family he had left, the living embodiment of every choice he'd made and every dream he'd destroyed. "The hierarchy means exactly what it's always meant," Marcus said finally. "I make the decisions. Everyone else follows orders. Reyes stays on intelligence because that's where I need her. And if the war gets hot, if we need every gun we can get, then we'll adapt. But she stays where I put her. Diego nodded, but Marcus could see the doubt in his eyes. In a business where perception was reality and weakness was fatal, playing favorites was dangerous. It made enemies wonder if you were losing your edge, made allies question your judgment. It was exactly the kind of mistake that could get a leader killed. But as Marcus watched Sophia through the bulletproof glass that separated his office from the main floor, watched her poring over surveillance photos and police reports with the focused intensity of a scholar, he couldn't bring himself to care about the strategic implications. For 23 years, he'd been a perfect leader, cold, calculating, putting the organization above everything else. For 23 years, it had worked. Now, for the first time since he'd lost Maria and baby Sophia, he had something more important than the Serpientes to protect. He just hoped he could do it without getting them both killed. The war began on a Tuesday night in October, with gunfire and blood and the kind of chaos that Marcus had spent years learning to control. Carlos Vega had decided to make a statement, hitting 3 Serpientes safe houses simultaneously in a coordinated attack designed to cripple their operations and send a message about who really controlled the streets. The message was received. 2 safe houses burned, 6 soldiers dead, tens of thousands of dollars in drugs and weapons destroyed. It was a declaration of war written in smoke and blood, and it demanded an immediate response. Marcus called an emergency meeting of all his lieutenants, including Sophia. She'd earned her place at the table through months of solid intelligence work, and excluding her now would raise more questions than including her. Vega thinks he can wipe us out with one coordinated strike, Marcus said, standing at the head of the conference table. He's wrong. But he's also forced our hand. We hit back now, hard, or we look weak. And in this business, looking weak is the same as being dead. What's the target? Asked Diego. Their main warehouse on Industrial Boulevard. 50 kilos of product, $500,000 in cash, and Carlos Vega's personal operations center. We take it tonight, we send our own message. Security? Heavy. 20 guys minimum, maybe more. They'll be expecting retaliation, so they'll be ready for us. Casualties? Marcus met his lieutenant's eyes. Whatever it takes. Around the table, heads nodded. This was the life they'd all chosen, the risk they accepted every day. Violence was just business, and business was good. Except for Sophia. She sat quietly, absorbing the discussion, her face revealing nothing. But Marcus knew her well enough by now to read the tension in her shoulders, the slight tightness around her eyes. She was thinking, calculating, preparing for war. Reyes, Marcus said. You'll coordinate communications from here. Keep us connected to our lookouts, monitor police frequencies, track emergency response times. Sir, she said, and Marcus could hear the disappointment in her voice. I'd prefer to be in the field. Your preference is noted. Your assignment stands. With respect, I've earned the right to stand with my brothers when it counts. The room went quiet. Every lieutenant, every soldier, everyone who'd been with the Serpientes for more than 5 minutes understood that you didn't argue with Marcus's orders. Not unless you wanted to find out how deep loyalty really ran. But Sophia wasn't just another soldier. She was his daughter, and she had Maria's fierce independence running through her veins like fire. Your job, Marcus said carefully, is to follow orders. Not to decide which orders are worthy of your talents. My job is to serve the Serpientes. I can do that better with a gun in my hand than sitting behind a radio. This isn't a debate, Reyes. It should be. You're keeping your best assets on the sidelines while sending lesser soldiers into danger. That's not strategy. That's enough. Marcus's voice cut through the room like a blade, sharp enough to draw blood. You will coordinate communications. You will stay here. You will follow orders. Is that clear? Sophia stared at him for a long moment, her eyes blazing with frustration and wounded pride. Around the table, the other lieutenants watched the confrontation with the careful attention of men who understood that this conversation was about more than tactical assignments. "Crystal clear," she said finally. "Good. Diego, take point on the warehouse assault. Santos, cover the exits. Rodriguez, handle the approach. Everyone else, standard formation. We move in 2 hours." The meeting broke up, lieutenants filing out to prepare their crews and check their weapons. Sophia was the last to leave, stopping at the door to look back at Marcus. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life," Marcus replied. "This isn't one of them." She left without another word, and Marcus was alone with the weight of his decision and the ghost of Maria's voice asking him to keep their daughter safe. 2 hours later, Marcus was riding in the passenger seat of an armored SUV, watching the city blur past in streaks of neon and shadow. Beside him, Diego checked his weapon for the 3rd time, a nervous habit left over from his early days running small-time jobs. "You think Reyes will stay put?" Diego asked. Marcus didn't answer immediately. He was thinking about 18-month-old Sophia taking her first wobbly steps across a small apartment, fearless and determined even then. Some things, he was learning, didn't change. "No," he said finally. "She won't." "You want me to call back, have someone keep an eye on her?" "Won't matter. If she's decided to come, she'll find a way." That doesn't sound like the kind of subordinate who follows orders. Marcus almost smiled. "She's not." The warehouse sat on the corner of Industrial Boulevard and 5th Street, a squat concrete building surrounded by chain-link fence and razor wire. Intelligence suggested 20 guards minimum, possibly more, armed with everything from handguns to assault rifles. Marcus's crew numbered 15, all experienced soldiers who'd been with him through previous wars. They knew how to move, how to shoot, how to kill quietly and efficiently. It should have been enough. But as they approached the warehouse perimeter, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The building was too quiet, the security too light. Carlos Vega was many things, violent, unpredictable, completely insane, but he wasn't stupid. After hitting 3 Serpientes safe houses, he would be expecting retaliation. So where was everyone? The answer came 15 minutes later, in the form of muzzle flashes and the distinctive crack of high-powered rifles. Not from the warehouse, but from the buildings surrounding it. Vega hadn't been defending his warehouse, he'd been using it as bait for an ambush. "It's a trap!" Diego shouted over the gunfire. "Fall back!" But there was nowhere to fall back to. The Diablos had positioned themselves in a perfect killing field, with overlapping fields of fire that turned the street into a death zone. Marcus's crew was pinned down behind cars and concrete barriers, taking fire from 3 directions while Vega's soldiers moved to cut off their escape routes. Marcus pressed himself against the bullet-scarred wall of a loading dock, his mind racing through tactical options. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and caught in a carefully planned trap. In another few minutes, the Diablos would finish flanking them and it would all be over. That's when he heard the sound of an engine roaring to life somewhere behind the Diablo positions. A black motorcycle burst out of an alley 2 blocks away, rider low over the handlebars, moving fast and aggressive toward the warehouse. Marcus couldn't see the rider's face, but he recognized the bike. It belonged to one of his soldiers. It belonged to Sophia. She hit the first Diablo checkpoint doing 60 miles per hour, the bike's engine screaming like a banshee. The 2 guards stationed there had just enough time to turn toward the sound before she opened fire with a submachine gun, spraying bullets with deadly accuracy while maintaining perfect control of the motorcycle. Both guards went down, their return fire going wide as Sophia accelerated past them toward the warehouse. "Who the hell is that?" shouted one of Marcus's lieutenants. Marcus didn't answer. He was watching his daughter wage a one-woman war against Carlos Vega's army, drawing their attention and their firepower away from his pinned-down crew. It was magnificent. It was terrifying. It was exactly the kind of reckless heroism that was going to get her killed. Sophia reached the warehouse loading dock and abandoned the motorcycle, rolling behind cover as bullets sparked off concrete around her. She came up firing, her movements fluid and precise, each shot calculated to maximum effect. The distraction was enough. Marcus's crew used the chaos to break out of the kill zone, returning fire with renewed intensity. The tide of battle shifted as the Diablos found themselves caught between two forces, their carefully planned ambush dissolving into a running firefight. But Vega's soldiers were still more numerous, and they were fighting on ground they'd chosen. As the battle raged, Marcus watched Sophia's position being slowly surrounded. She was holding her own, but she couldn't hold out forever. Marcus made a decision that 23 years of careful leadership should have prevented. Instead of coordinating his crew's withdrawal, instead of cutting losses and preserving the organization, he moved toward Sophia's position. "Boss!" Diego called after him. "Where are you going?" Marcus didn't answer. He couldn't explain that he was about to throw away everything he'd built for a daughter who didn't know his name. He made it halfway across the killing field before the bullet found him. The impact spun him around and dropped him to his knees, hot blood soaking through his shirt. He could see Sophia 30 yards away, still fighting, still magnificent, still unaware that her father was bleeding out in the street. Carlos Vega appeared from behind a concrete barrier, rifle raised, moving toward Marcus with the predatory confidence of a man who'd finally cornered his prey. "Marcus Delgado," Vega said, close enough now to be heard over the gunfire. "The great leader of the Serpientes. Not so tough when you're bleeding in the street." Marcus tried to stand, couldn't manage it. The bullet had done more damage than he'd thought. "You should have minded your own business, old man. Should have stayed out of my territory." "Your territory?" Marcus coughed, tasting blood. "This has been Serpientes' ground for 20 years. Not anymore." Vega raised the rifle to finish him, and Marcus closed his eyes thinking about Maria, about the baby girl he'd held for 18 months, about all the ways he'd failed the people he was supposed to protect. The shot rang out, impossibly loud in the sudden silence. When Marcus opened his eyes, Carlos Vega was falling backward, a red stain spreading across his chest. Behind him, smoke still rising from the barrel of her gun, stood Sophia. She ran to Marcus, dropping to her knees beside him, her hands moving over his wound with practiced efficiency. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad enough." Marcus could feel his strength draining away with his blood. "Why did you come?" "I ordered you to stay back." "Good thing I don't follow orders very well." Despite everything, Marcus almost smiled. "You get that from your mother." Something in his voice made her look up sharply, studying his face. "What did you say?" Marcus knew he was dying. He could feel it in the growing cold, the way sounds were becoming distant and strange. Which meant this was his only chance, his last opportunity to tell her the truth she deserved to know. With tremendous effort, he reached into his shirt and pulled out a folded photograph, worn and yellowed with age, edges soft from decades of handling. It was the same photograph that adorned Sophia's tattoo, the same image he'd tattooed onto Maria's shoulder 26 years ago. "I took this picture," he whispered, placing it in her hands. "In our apartment. Your mother was 6 months pregnant with you." Sophia stared at the photograph, then at Marcus, her mind struggling to process what he was telling her. "Your mother's name was Maria Martinez before she changed it to Reyes. You were born on April 15, 1999. You took your first steps when you were 14 months old. You had a birthmark on your shoulder that looked like a butterfly." "How do you?" Sophia's voice caught. "Because I'm your father." Marcus reached up with a shaking hand to touch her face. "I'm the man who loved your mother more than life itself. I'm the man who held you when you were born and swore to protect you forever. I'm the man who failed at everything that mattered." Tears were streaming down Sophia's face now, 26 years of questions finally answered in the worst possible way. "Why?" she whispered. "Why did you leave us?" "Because I thought you'd be safer without me. Because I was young and stupid and scared. Because I chose this life over you and your mother, and it was the worst mistake I ever made." Marcus's vision was starting to gray around the edges, but he forced himself to keep talking. "I've spent 23 years wondering if you were safe, if you were happy. When you walked into my office 6 months ago, I should have told you the truth. I should have found a way to get you out of this life. But you didn't. I was selfish. I wanted to know you, to be near you, even if you never knew who I was. I wanted to protect you the only way I knew how. Sophia pressed her hands against his wound, trying to stop the bleeding, but they both knew it was too late. If you live through this, Marcus said, his voice growing weaker, if you survive tonight, I want you to walk away. Leave the Serpientes, leave this city, start over somewhere clean. Build the life your mother wanted for you. I can't just leave. Promise me. Marcus gripped her hand with what remained of his strength. Promise me you'll get out. Promise me you'll have the life I never could give you. I promise, Sophia whispered. Marcus smiled then, a real smile, the first truly peaceful expression he'd worn in 26 years. I love you, Mija. I always have. Tell your mother, when you see her again, tell her I never stopped loving her either. His eyes closed, his breathing stopped, and Marcus Delgado died holding his daughter's hand in a street war that had already claimed too many lives. Sophia knelt beside her father's body as sirens wailed in the distance and the surviving Diablos melted away into the night. Around her, the remnants of the Serpientes were regrouping, counting casualties, preparing for whatever came next. Diego appeared at her shoulder, his face grim. Sophia, he said quietly. We need to go. Cops will be here in 5 minutes. She looked up at him, this man who had been her father's right hand, her father's oldest friend. Did you know? She asked. Diego nodded. I suspected. You have his eyes. His way of standing when you're thinking through a problem. But he never said anything, never confirmed it. Why? Because he was trying to keep you safe. Because he knew that being Marcus Delgado's daughter would make you a target for every gang in the city. Because he loved you more than he loved himself, even if he could never find a way to show it. Sophia looked down at her father one last time, memorizing his face, storing away this moment when everything changed. What happens now? She asked. Now you decide who you want to be. You can take over the Serpientes, most of the crew would follow you, especially after tonight. Or you can walk away. Start over. Live the life he wanted for you. 15 days later, Sophia Delgado, she'd taken back her father's name, walked out of the city and never looked back. She kept the tattoo, the photograph, and the promise she'd made to a dying man in a street war that had consumed too many lives. She found work in a small town 2 states away, teaching self-defense to women who'd survived domestic violence, using the skills her father's world had taught her to protect people who couldn't protect themselves. On quiet nights, she would look at the tattoo on her forearm and remember 3 people, the mother who had raised her with love and sacrifice, the father who had protected her from the shadows, and the daughter she might have been if choices had been different. She never forgot where she came from. But she never went back. Because some promises, once made to the right person at the right moment, are more binding than blood, stronger than loyalty, and more precious than revenge. Marcus Delgado had been a lot of things in his 45 years, gang leader, father, protector, failure. But in the end, he'd been exactly what he'd promised to be when he first held his daughter as a baby. He'd been the man who loved her enough to let her go. And sometimes, that's the most a father can do. The tattoo remained perfect, a mother and daughter forever connected, carrying forward the love that had survived gang wars and broken families in 26 years of separation. Some ink fades. Some promises break. But some bonds, once made in love and sealed in sacrifice, last forever. Even when everything else falls apart.